am I
us
coming in?
tonight.
You hear me there on the AirPods?
Yep, I can hear you.
All
Can you
right.
hear me?
Okay. Got you.
All right, so we're good to go. So, Doug, thank you so much for joining us tonight for the Art Talk series. As you know, this is a chance for us to catch up with folks like you, important members of our community that have contributed since way back when. You have a long and storied career dating back to when you were a teenager in San Francisco. And so I think we're in for a special treat tonight for all of those, including myself, that don't know your personal history and that have never heard you tell the story of growing up as a writer. So just to kind of set us up, where did you grow up and how did you discover writing?
All right. So I grew up right outside of San Francisco. It's the next city south, Daly City. And I mean, even prior to writing graffiti the way that we know it now, I mean, in my neighborhood, it was a lot of kind of lowrider culture, gang culture. I grew up hanging out with a lot of kids and doing that style of art. So I was already kind of doing this, kind of almost like gang oriented graffiti and like neighborhood names and stuff like that. And maybe around 1984, there were some kids from my neighborhood, two guys specifically, a guy who went by Baby Huey and his cousin Shady. And they were drawing some lettering forms on the playground floor. And it was just what I saw was the first time I kind of seen this new style. And I asked them what that was all about. And the way they explained it to me was just, straight, simple as New York style. And I think that was kind of the first intro or even thought in my mind of that there's this other thing going on.
And how old were you at the time?
That was maybe about just turned 13.
And so, with that sort of introduction, when did you decide that you wanted to do it yourself?
It started right. It's almost, how life as a kid, it's like dog years. 1 year feels like 7 years. It felt so long, but I felt like that first year and going into maybe it was that kind of end of 83 or early 84. I can't remember exactly, but it started popping up around my neighborhood. Other people that I knew and were kind of doing the same thing I was doing before that started transitioning to this new style. And even that picture you have up there, that was like a very early kind of painting space. It was an old abandoned elementary school that I went to. And even when I look back at that, the reason I even wanted to show that photo is like my letter forms were still coming out of the kind of cholo phase, but I was trying to reinterpret it into what I believed was this new thing that new to me that was coming from New York.
God, so maybe the arrows and the stars or
Yeah, even
some of
the color, it went away from just being black and white or one color to incorporating colors to filling in backgrounds. Like that was kind of this new and kind of exciting turn to take it into.
and what about, the character with the spray can and the boombox?
Also, I mean, I think for probably much of the country at that time, not that graffiti obviously doesn't strictly have origins in hip hop, but I think the idea of like kids getting into breakdancing and that kind of b-boying kind of making its way throughout the country. I mean, along with it came this style of art that many people at that time associated it with that.
And were you, a b-boy yourself, or was it just something that just captivated you?
It was more of the art. I don't think that I really cared so much. I mean, I might have like any kid tried to give it a try and break dance a little bit, but it just wasn't my thing. It was more of continuing, like I was already drawing and doing some level of graffiti type art already. So it was like how to transition into this new kind of exciting world that I knew nothing about.
And you start this off, where's your family with all of this? Did they understand it? Did they even know that it was going on?
Yeah, I think, man, I mean, I'm sure like many kids that grew up in the 70s and 80s. I mean, you're not supervised like kids are today. You just, even at that time prior to this, I mean, I'm already staying out till, past midnight when I'm 12, going into the city, you're stealing bikes, you're just doing bad shit. That's what, I don't know, kids weren't like that then, you know?
So you discover this whole world, and how did you come up with style? Were you just experimenting? But
It's biting, you know, it's those glimpses. I mean, I saw that. It was like when I saw the Wild Style logo. It's
sure,
like that was my interpretation of that D. It's like that was all these, like, you know, back then obviously there was no internet, magazines. Maybe IGT was around. I don't know when IGT started,
yeah,
but
something in the early '80s. Sure, it was around,
yeah, you
but
know, at that
if you
point, I
found
don't
it, you
think,
found it.
yeah, Subway Art wasn't out yet. So it was like mostly album covers. I remember the first thing that I saw that had letters that I recognized to be what this new thing was the Malcolm McLaren's Duck Rock album.
Yes,
And then
yes,
later
and it
I
had
understand that
Dondi
that was
letters.
Dondi. But at that point, I was just like, you know, excited to see this again, this new art form that was emerging for me.
And you know, you see this the influence of this of wild style, but then the words devious on top of it
That
have
was, you know, Uprock Doze. I mean, it was like these things were getting around. I didn't even know who Doze was at that time, and I didn't see the Uprock album. But I remember a kid that I knew drew a bunch of those Uprock b-boys on his folder at school.
amazing.
And it's like, you know, it's you know, man, it's hard, not hard to explain, but it's just kind of remember when you're a kid, like how you kind of capture information. You know, you're so excited by these things, but there's just you're only given these little tiny snack sized pieces to chew on, you know, and you kind of take it and you run with it, but you're trying to figure it out. You don't know what you're doing yet, you know?
Sure. And at the time when you started it, I mean, this is here is 1984. How many other people were actively, you know, painting?
You know, it was starting to emerge. And I think that first, you know, like anything when you're a kid, you almost don't know there's others quite like you yet, you know? And it started really like in a real close radius, like to where I lived. There was a kid who lived up the street from me, and I find out that he writes slime. And his name's everywhere. It's like kind of like the first person in my neighborhood that was really just kind of up, like to the point where you knew, like, you know, you hear stories on how like, oh, the cops are going to find out who he is and all this stuff, but he's starting to write, and we meet up with him. And at that time, you know, have friends that are breaking and b-boying, and they have a crew called Reckless Crew, and I kind of hang out with them, but I'm more like just a dude like painting and doing, you know, drawing on their sweatshirts and doing stuff like that. But once they kind of let go of b-boying and started getting more into writing, the whole thing changed, and we changed the name of the crew to the Reckless Writers. And that was
Got it.
kind of the first crew, and that was probably right around that time too, like the end of '84. And
And
at that time, another kid that lived up the street from me, he wrote Rel, R-E-L. Me and him started just kind of taking tags on the buses, the local bus, the 14 Mission that went from top of the hill, Daly City, to the end of Mission near the water of the bay. And what happened, which we didn't, you know, almost couldn't have foreseen this because we thought we were just onto something new. And at that time, I mean, I don't remember any of this style of graffiti being on the public transit yet out there. It was a lot of like maybe punk rock writing or some gang writing, but nothing that was like a person tagging their name. And what we started noticing, we'd write on buses once they got to our neighborhood, but buses started coming back with new names on them. It was almost like that early kind of communication. Another thing that excites you, you start realizing there's other people out there. And more, I think that we just started kind of, you know, opening up our web, kind of going deeper into the city, start hearing about other people. You start seeing other people out there. At that time, there was a guy who really like it stood out because he was maybe the first people that was doing throw ups, was a guy who wrote Mr. A. And that was, you know, popping up all over San Francisco, a lot of kind of in bold spots. And it was just the beginning of seeing this, like, you know, two color fills that were popping up everywhere. And we later on found out who he was, and he lived in our neighborhood. He was a little bit older, and he eventually changed from writing Mr. A to writing Riff. And I think a lot of people who know the history of San Francisco remember him as like kind of the first writer who kind of got it, who understood it, who was like, had really, really, really nice hand styles, had nice throw ups, was already evolved for that time of like the early 80s where we didn't know what we're doing yet. We're still trying to figure it out.
It looks
You
like,
know,
here in this image from 85, it looks like you're figuring it out.
we're starting, things are starting to come our way. You know, I remember the Slime had found a copy of Subway Art, I guess, when it just came out, and he showed that to me, and I mean, you know, I fucking flipped when I saw that. I was, let me borrow it. I went to my mom's work and I Xeroxed the whole book so that I could have a black and white copy of it. You know, and Riff later on, he racked copies of that Getting Up, and then read that from beginning to end and started understanding that it's more than just kids, you know, developing this art form. It's a culture that goes with it. There's terminology. Kids are, they're racking paint, they're forming crews. Like it started really kind of giving, you know, me and a lot of friends of mine like just this understanding that there's something big happening. This is bigger than just, you know, a little phase of kids writing on walls. It's bigger than we understand.
So when you read those texts and saw the book, did that make you want to be more committed to doing it?
Definitely. I mean, it's like you want to emulate that. You know, to be honest with you, I mean, a few years later, you know, we were not just racking paint, but going into that mindset of like, oh, let's go fucking rob stores. Let's get a lot of paint. Like it was this thing that drove us to this idea of like, you know, it almost like the adventure of it. More than just the act of creating art, there was like this fun and adventures that you can get into, and you know, going places just for paint. We'd go, I think sometimes, to be honest, I mean, I might have been more attracted to that aspect of it than actually doing the art. You know, hopping on trains to other cities that stores hadn't been touched yet, and just to find, you know, ultra wide markers and mini wides and ink and places that still had Flowmaster and all the colors of Krylon that you couldn't find locally. And, you know, at that time, I think that all of that was part of this whole excitement of it, you know?
So, talk to me a little bit about the piece that we're seeing right now. It's you in front of a Doug piece. It says 85. It says OTB on one side. Do you remember doing this, and your inspiration?
Yeah, I think that was, you know, probably right after Subway Art. I'm assuming, I'm looking at it now, you know, it's probably influenced by Scene, UA. You know, it just had that, maybe it was the colors, it was the 3Ds, maybe some of the bars. They're not direct bites, but it's almost like my interpretation of how I thought graffiti should look.
And where was this piece?
This is in the same spot that that earlier one you showed. It's this elementary school that was abandoned that became kind of a first kind of painting yard for me and a lot of others in that area.
And was it sort of allowed, or did no one just care about what was happening right
I
there?
think nobody cared. I mean, it wasn't just that wall, but it was also the school was still intact, somewhat, you know, and it was like all boarded up. And remember, you know, it just looked almost like a scene from, at times, like a part of like some weird movie set where you could go inside and thing. Part of it was walls were broken out, and there was still maybe a film projectors and things lying around. And little by little, they broke the school down more. But you know, it's a spot where older kids just hung out and got high, and we started coming around. Well, me actually, not even, you know, I was probably younger than a lot of other kids that were even writing at that time, but there were still like kids that, you know, were maybe 18, 19, 20 that hung out there, just, you know, drank. And there was like, you know, a gang in my neighborhood up the street, these guys, Wino Park. And that was kind of like their kind of playground where they hung out just to drink and smoke dust and do whatever else they were doing.
And so did any of these teenagers or care about what you were doing, or were you just sort of flying under the radar?
Yeah, nah, not really. I mean, I think maybe some people tease me a little bit about it, like kind of like they didn't get it, I mean, I think at that time, a lot of those kids, it's mostly, like mostly Chicano kids. And I think that their view of it was like, what are you doing? Like, that's some black kids shit, that's how they kind of would treat it.
Yes. It's interesting when you had that sort of culture clash happening and it just
Yeah,
didn't
people,
quite
they
get
didn't
it.
understand what was going on. But, another part I'd like to throw into this, man, is that this movement tore down a lot of those walls, because prior to me going into the city for graffiti, my neighborhood was very separated from neighborhoods in the city. And like, they knew I was from Daly City. I knew they were from the Mission or from where, the Bernal Heights or some other neighborhoods. And there would always be beef. And these are kids that you'd go to the city, or I'd see them in other parts of the city, and me and my friends and them and their friends would get into fights. And you kind of grow up hating a lot of these kids. And just a few short years later, you realize, oh, they right now. And oftentimes, man, it's like that shit got dropped, and all of a sudden now, because of graffiti, I was able to go to neighborhoods that I was always just a little more shook to go to before, because I knew it would be nothing but drama.
That's very interesting. So there was a camaraderie that started to build, or at
Yeah, it's
least
like you'd go, yeah,
recognition.
for sure. I mean, I'd go to a mission and I'd run into people that I had beef with in the past, but now I'm hanging with other people from the mission that are doing graffiti, and they would kind of mediate the situation. As soon as someone would step to me, they'd just be like, yo, let it drop. He's cool. Like, what the fuck?
So here we have another piece of yours from 85, and you're introducing characters as well into your work.
Yeah, it's still like, it's going back to what I was saying. I mean, it's trying to figure it out, right? It's emulating. I'm now really paying attention to what's going on in New York, because I have subway art. I've remember a night I had a friend call my house, my home, my family home, and told me turn on, put it on PBS right now. And he was like, "There's a graffiti movie on." And I put it on, and it was Style Wars. And it's like I couldn't believe that. Fuck, they made a movie about this thing that I'm so in love with right now. Like no one told me about that. I'm not like, you're not old enough. I'm not reading New York Times. I'm not reading anything to know that this kind of stuff exists. So you turn it on, and I mean, you're just blown away. Now it's not just a book showing pictures. It's seeing people in action doing it. It's hearing people talking about it. I mean, I'm sure not just me, but kids all over the country at that time. It's like all the writers that were in there, the schemes, mayor, everybody, it become like folk heroes to us. You know what I'm saying? It's like you start, the lines. Kids like, this is it. Like, all those things ring a bell with like you and your friends, that you understand like this thing is happening, and it's all, you know, through this type of media, these things that were coming out. And I don't know. I think that definitely from that moment on exploded things even further.
So influential. It was such an influential film, and to you and to everybody all over the world. It really sort of opened up, everybody's eyes to what was happening and to possibility.
Yes, for sure.
And so in here you see on the screen now you see a sketch, which is showing that you're practicing at home. You're drawing. You're trying to, you're figuring out not only on a wall, but in your spare time. How much did you dedicate to drawing and practicing?
I mean, a lot. I think at that point in my life, I mean, that's all I wanted to do. I mean, even going into, that, I know I did that when I was in eighth grade. And, the following year, my freshman year in high school, RW crew, some of the guys got into other things. And, me, my boy Bizarro, and Disc started a new crew, TMF crew. And it started out as, you know, just the three of us. It was like originally, it was like almost like a small little crew to write on the school or whatever, you know, it's like three mellow fellows. It started out. But once we kind of got things going, other guys that were in RW and other people were like, oh, I want to be down too. So we just expanded that and started thinking about, you know, kind of bringing the best people we knew on board with that crew. And I think that was the beginning of, now we want to kind of get out there and be recognized for this. At first, I don't know if it was so much for recognition. You know, even that piece right there, that was right before that. That was Slim, which he was a very uprighter at the time, and myself. And that was just right before TMF started. Slim also became down with TMF. You know,
So,
and
so this is you as not even maybe 14 years old.
yeah, about that time. Yeah.
And
And
so, you
again,
know,
the wall, you see it, it's just like, I think that wall to me felt like maybe what a train would be shaped like.
sure.
So it's like, let's try to paint it in the same way that I felt like some of the trains I was looking at would be laid out.
So very cool. And so you start to, you know, you're into high school, you start to change, you form this new crew, and then there's this piece, which is a Free South Africa piece. What was going on at the time? You're sort of breaking away from yourself as Doug to do a mural.
Yeah, you know, that particular piece, that was, you know, me and Slim. And I think, you know, Slim at that time, you know, 14, 15, he's maybe 18. And I remember hanging out with him, and all we're doing is just, you know, smoking a bunch of weed and talking about stuff. And him being older than me, I think had, you know, a mindset of his beginning to pay attention to politics and, you know, from a kid's lens, you know, like you're seeing things that frustrate you in the world. And I remember him having strong feelings about like, oh, it's fucked up what's going on down there, what they're doing to people. Like we should do something about to kind of, you know, make that vocal. And, you know, I drew it up just kind of, you know, using those, you know, Letraset book letters. Our whole idea with that was like we wanted it to be stylish, but also readable.
Sure.
And just a random, you know, cartoons with, you know, from Looney Tunes. And it's funny because I remember that came out in Jim Prigoff's book, that the spray can art. And at that
Yeah,
time, I remember, you know, like, oh man, that dude didn't show any of, you know, pictures of my pieces that had, you know, more style centered. He chose this one, but now I, you know, I understand why he did that. You know, that was he was being an adult.
yeah, and I think he respected the fact that you guys had this voice and finding a voice beyond just your name, I guess, which is very cool. And I think for me, this was the first time that I got to see your work as well. I mean, this introduced sort of San Francisco to the rest of us that hadn't traveled there in person.
Yeah, for sure, man. And I mean, as Jim Prigoff did, I think that you know, it needs to be noted that right in 19, like the fall of 85, Jim Prigoff put together a slideshow in the Mission District that brought kids who were writing and were, you know, just into graffiti in general from all over the Bay Area out that night. And I remember that night as a night that, like, for the first time, you're meeting all these names that you started seeing out there, and people really eager to talk about it and wanted to link up. And you have kids exchanging information so that they could start painting together. And, you know, even prior to that, I mean, there was the whole East Bay, you know, like Oakland, Berkeley. You have the task force, and you have, you know, Chaos and Cuba and a bunch of other guys from out there. And you know, later on, Cuba is somebody who was probably writing in San Francisco in '82. I just didn't know it yet. You know, he also is like an older dude who, from what I understand, I know came out from Baltimore. And even back then in the early '80s, he was writing a little bit with Revolt. And so he had an understanding of East Coast style graffiti already that he brought with him. And I think there was other people that I hear of that were in Berkeley at the time, that were a lot of East Coast writers that were going to school out there that brought, you know, their influence as well. So
Sure.
it's
So there's a
almost like,
direct connection.
yeah, you start seeing like how people traveling brought their understanding of graffiti with them, and how it just, you know, sets off that chain of events for a new city.
So question before we move on to the next slide. The Free South Africa piece, where was it located?
That's on 16th in Valencia in San Francisco. I don't know if you're familiar with that area, the Valencia, and you know, it's now that's pit's long gone. There's a, you know, a building and coffee shop and all that other stuff built on top of it. But at the time, even all the what you could see up above, I mean, I think San Francisco had a lot of political and a lot of like punk rock art going on at that time.
Yeah,
You know,
I
even
see it.
that
I
started
see it up there.
affecting us. I think that, you know, there was right around that time in high school, there was a crew, AFH in Daly City, that always fucking high crew. And they were all like kind of, you know, breaking the mold also of what people understood as a graffiti writer. Cause now you got a whole crew that's just like hardcore punk kids. And now
Yes.
they're starting to bring that element into writing, and they all have names that sound very punk rock, like, you know, that Pain 68, which passed away just not so long ago, and Harm and Zyme, and, you know, all these kids were going to a lot of punk shows and inviting me to go check that out. And that was the first time of me being introduced to now another element of society, another culture that I was unfamiliar with. And that started affecting my graffiti as well. Now, even in this, it's like I'm throwing anarchy signs in graffiti without really understanding it, but just maybe at that time thinking I like that concept.
Sure. I mean, and I think it's a really interesting photo to note sorry about that, the skulls that are above your pieces, you know, and the roller sort of paint, you know, house paint graffiti that's up on top as well. Things that, you know, we would see much later, but that were already happening in the streets.
Yeah, and I'm saying, like, you know, like you see a lot of, and just street art in general, right? Like that pre-gentrification street art.
Yes.
That's as when things were a little run down and people didn't want to quite move there, be a part of that community yet. A lot of that kind of stuff existed.
So, you know, you share some of these images of, you know, writing in the streets, and you get to see how bombed certain, you know, places were. How bombed was it?
You know, at that time, San Francisco had a lot of graffiti going on. I think there was just an excitement with young people, man. And it went through phases, you know. That was still like right around that time, 86. A whole movement really jumped off. And I mean, I want to give a lot of credit to that movement to Bizarro, who's right there on the left in that photo. Of you know, sometimes when people think of San Francisco, they think of this style of tagging that's kind of has this kind of weird, like one flow tag. And a lot of that people don't realize is like started with him. He used to write Bizarro, but he also wrote BZR in this one flow style. And all the kids who were writing on buses started to emulate that style. And it became what's weird, like, I don't know why, you know, I know why they call it this, but it became like a bus hopper style. Because the buses were really the target, not for throw ups, not for pieces, but just inside and out being destroyed with tags.
Right. So that's what people were wanting to do, or kids wanted to become taggers, not necessarily aspire to anything else. That was sort of the pinnacle.
That was, yeah, I'd say most of the kids, that's what they were doing, you know. And then also kids in our crew kind of were both part of that. I mean, that's, you know, a picture of crew and other kids that were down with us. And all those people in that crew, I mean, in that picture right there, most of them got up heavily on buses. You know, little guy right there on the left in that photo, Rocco, I mean, he was up like crazy. Dude kneeling down, T1, he was up like crazy. You know, on the far right, Ink was on a lot of the buses. You know, in the far back was Disc, and Disc was Rocco's partner, and they were up like crazy on the buses.
You know, what happened with these writers? Did they have long careers, or when did they decide to maybe move on? How long
You
was an
know, man,
average career?
I think it was short lived. I think there was that idea of like, I went through it long enough, even back then, it's not that long, to realize that by the time I'm 17, people are like, "What, you still doing that?" Like that would be something that you'd hear a lot. Like, people are trying to go to clubs and they're hanging out with girls and doing all this other stuff. And like, what are you doing? Still writing on walls? I think that the life of people doing graffiti back then, how long they wrote for was fairly short.
So what kept you going, or what kept you motivated enough to last?
Man, I think just a continued interest in it, and I guess being part of, riding the wave of seeing it evolve and learning more about it and the different phases. I mean, you get to, past 86, 87, 88, things start changing. Something that happened that was at that time is Jim Prigoff introduced, I think it was Rise from our crew to Orko from Chicago, who was part of like, I don't know if it's a direct connection to MPC from New York, and also another crew called the Feds from south side of Chicago. And he came out, started hanging out with us, motivating us to paint, got down with our crew, and you know, a dude brought a lot of new ideas and energy to the city with him, and shared a lot with our crew, and we started doing like these huge kind of park productions. Now it's not just getting up a small piece, but let's take over the whole park, get every open wall on it, and get enough people so that it's one coherent piece with like everybody's names and characters, backgrounds. And he was a big part of influencing that. But unfortunately, whatever reasons, that relationship kind of broke up and soured with the crew and turned into this, kind of thing where, and I get it, egos, man. Graffiti got a lot of egos, and I don't know how it got spread around, but him, kind of like, oh, I went over there, I taught all those dudes everything they know, and all that kind of shit that young people talk. And I get it. I mean, he brought something, but like people don't realize that's just another little speck in time. That was just, we were already doing something. He just momentarily brought something to that trajectory, but things move on after that. And you go into the next phase of things. Once people come and go, you kind of keep going on and you do things. And I think, fast forward that even, just a couple years after that, now you get to the, early 90s. And now we have a lot of people coming into San Francisco, from all over the place, from Los Angeles, from a lot of New Yorkers, a lot of people from pretty much all over the country, if not maybe a few people from other countries, and bringing their brand of getting up. Our crew at that time, Barry McGee was starting to kind of dabble in the beginnings of his professional art career, still in school, but starting to get shows. And he was down with our crew and we were painting a lot. And with him came, guys like, KR Crank and, his boy Shock, and all these people that started really being in line with our crew. And I think they brought a lot of the motivation and the kind of educated us also on the how to really fucking bomb. I think before that we weren't thinking of it so much as like this, consistent stamping of graffiti. But when that came around, that kind of, changed graffiti into a whole new phase of like San Francisco being a city where people are now coming to bomb because they knew other writers that were, up really hard were here as well.
Right. It did become one of those magnet cities.
Yeah, for that time, early 90s,
And so
And also, man,
how involved with it were you then? Were you still heavily involved, or were you sort of, phasing
that,
yourself out?
that's kind of, well, that kind of, reinvigorated everything. Now that can, like things come at the right time, right? It's still fun to do all that stuff, and it's still fun to rack, and it's still fun to go out and paint. But now, you're in your early 20s. So it also becomes part of your social life. I'd go meet with all these guys at the bar, and, shoot pool and hang out, drink a bunch of drinks, and then go out after. And now we're out all night just painting on shit and bombing and, doing it again the next day.
At the time, did you mentioned before, Barry starting to do shows. Were you also interested in going and pursuing that route, or were more interested in just the bombing or the piecing element of it?
Man, just the bombing, the piecing element. At that time, man, I had myself just started going to school for illustration. And I just, it's like I never saw myself as kind of the fine artist type. I was just, maybe it's just that kind of working class upbringing of just like, this is, I need a job. I can't just mess around and hope for things to succeed. So I kind of went that route, which all those lines are blurred nowadays anyway, I should also mention, while I was in school, I had opened a store in Daly City that it started with me kind of trying to make money airbrushing jackets and jeans and all that sort of thing. But I started selling graffiti supplies.
Okay.
And that's when it just kind of opened up a whole other world of it. I remember, it's funny, man. I remember I started with I wanted to get those kind of, those kind of, not the softball caps, but just I guess we call them out here, phantom caps, the kind of caps that you would get on the Krylon Crystal Clear. And I had called up the Krylon company to see if they could send me some. And they let me know that they don't manufacture them, but they get them from a company called Sequest Valves. And
Yes.
that they're called actuators. And they gave me the number, and I called this company up, Sequest Valve, to see if they could send me some. And they were like, "Oh, we're sorry, we only deal with wholesale distribution. You'd have to buy 10,000 of them." And I was like, "Well, how much will 10,000 of them cost?" And I think it was something like $100. And I gave them my friend's tax ID number, had them send them out, and I think that was the beginning of fuck, man, this makes more money than airbrushing.
Those are some good margins.
Yeah, you're selling them for 10 cents a piece, and you're getting them, they're less than a penny a piece.
So you become this entrepreneur with this shop while you're studying illustration in school.
Yeah, while I'm in school. And it also, some in school, out there bombing on nights, have this shop. And at the same time, it's like I'm starting to meet people throughout the country through the mail, right? There's no email or anything yet. And I remember, with SP's magazine, gosh, I'm sure you remember the name right now. Skills magazine. KR had given me a few copies of that and let me know oh, he's one of my boys. And, I reached out to him and sent him photos and stuff like that, but also started running ads for my shop in the Skills magazine and trying to do mail orders, selling out, sending out caps and, marsh ink and anything else I could get my hands on.
Amazing. And so here in this photo you see BFB, which was their crew.
KR
and
BFB,
SP
MTC, it's all, KR was writing TMF at the time. We just kind of now have this exchange going on.
But this East Coast, West Coast connection.
Yeah. Now also, I should back up a little bit just to stay in a chronological order, because I know I skipped the whole segment. I know when you talk to Crayon, you guys, he brought up kind of, beefs or battles and things we had in the past. And, a lot of that stuff, I guess that's a big part of it. It's a lot of what we, they were kind of, I don't even want to say so much opposition of crews. I think that their idea and ideology of graffiti was just very different than ours. And I think because of that, we had, kind of created these kind of beefs with them, maybe a lot of shit talking. But also, it goes back to, there was one of my early pieces that you showed that had like the little guy with the mohawk with his hand up. Remember, I went next day to go photograph that, and someone had written all over it. And it was early on, it was crayon before he wrote crayon. And I think once I found out it was him, I was like, this guy I kind of have beef with, from that moment on a little bit.
All right, I'm trying to find the image here. Let's see if I could bring it up. Oh, maybe not.
Yeah, that's it. So anyway, I know like, he brought up the idea that like, oh, we had these, battles going on. And I mean, for us, I don't know if we thought of it so much like that. I mean, we wanted to paint, maybe a little bit of ego in us as well, and pride, gave us that feeling of like, oh, we need to do bigger and better shit. And then there's also a part of us and my crew that I think was a little more like, we'll just diss all this shit. Like, we don't care. We're not like, we're not opposed just to being assholes about it either,
Right, it's totally different philosophy.
Yeah, and I think that, I don't know if he kind of completely ever understood that's how, like, I remember times like when the idea of like my shit getting dissed, I was just like, in my head at that time, I was like, I don't even care. I'll stop writing for a while. All I will do is throw ups and do shit to destroy the shit. Like, and I look at it now and it's all water under the bridge. Actually, I like the guy now, I respect the murals and the work he's doing, but it's like when you're a kid, you don't have the maturity to work it out that way.
Sure, I mean,
You need an arch nemesis.
well, you also had the example of MPC, and I think you're even putting up MPC, and so you
No,
have
no,
sort of,
no. That was
oh no, that's MDC. I'm sorry,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
MDC.
yeah,
But even, that sort of mentality of a cat mentality of just going over everybody and dealing with the consequences that way,
yeah,
and
yeah. Of
taking over
course.
space.
And again, it was this thing. I mean, I know that again on our philosophies, I know that he was trying to be, like do things that were completely original, and referred to a lot of what I was doing as trying to be like New York. And there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, to me, it's like respecting where it came from and knowing where it came from. And that's kind of, I think just in general in life, man, I have this like traditionalist sense of things, it's like in anything I do. I mean, I like to cook a lot, and I'll follow recipes to a region. It's like, it has to be that way. If you don't do it, that's not how they do it in that region. I don't want to fuck it up, and I think I have a similar mindset when it comes to graffiti. It's like, obviously I want it to be original. I want it to be my own, but I want it to be part of a tradition that's bigger than me.
I get it. I get it. And so, and you did continue to do it. I mean, and it seems like you would come back, you'd maybe take some breaks. I'm not sure how many, how often you were painting at the time, but from the images you shared, there continues to be this sort of development in your style, year after year, and maybe technique as well.
Yeah, I think that, at times, I don't know if I've stayed so consistent in painting heavily. But I think that, I would always get that bug and come back out and what could I do now? Or I have some new ideas on how I want to paint. Even something like this piece that's up there right now, that's now after a point where I was going to school. So now I'm bringing this kind of illustration into things as well, that like based on, understanding, how to draw and shadows and things that I wasn't thinking about so much in earlier times.
And so when you were going to school and you started bringing this stuff in, what was your intention in school? Were you trying to be a designer and get into graphics, or
Yeah, I was
where were you headed?
trying to be an illustrator. I mean, I've always like it's had this thing with like graffiti art, and get into that in a little bit with what we're doing now with Morning Breath. But I've always kept it separate from a commercial aspect, with the exception for doing airbrushing. I never really wanted to make a career of trying to be in like a commercial graffiti artist in any way.
Got it.
So
So you kept it pure in
yeah,
that sense.
yeah, attempted to. And I mean, even in school, I don't think I ever really brought in any projects that had, anything to do with graffiti in them.
So when did you cross over to become a full-time artist? Uh, was it with not with Morning Breath, obviously you started doing
Yeah,
this much
yeah.
earlier.
Yeah, well, it started with doing a little bit of freelance work while I was in school. The shop that I was selling markers out of, I also had a studio in there. So it gave me space to kind of, set up illustrations and work on projects. But my first commercial job was with Think Skateboards in
Got
San
it.
Francisco.
Got it. And so for those of us that don't know, what was Think or who was behind Think and how did that play out for you?
Think Skateboards was, a San Francisco brand that was pretty much run by three guys: Keith Cochran, Greg Carroll, and Don Fisher. And they, dudes that I knew. I mean, I think that, to be honest, they didn't even want to hire me because they knew how I was and the type of trouble and things that I could bring and get into. But what it was Mike Giant was the artist there before me, the illustrator before me. And I remember at that time, I mean, I was getting in all kinds of trouble, and I remember I had to nothing serious, but had to go to jail for a while, and I would correspond with Mike Giant, write him letters, and him letting me know that he was going to leave, and I was like, oh, if you could, man, put in a word for me because I need to kind of get things straightened up soon. And so when I got out and things were cleared up and he was leaving, that's when I got the job and I started working there, and that's where I met Jason Noto, who's my partner in crime now with Morning Breath. He was a graphic designer there. The way they always paired it at Think is that they would try to pair a graphic designer with an illustrator to kind of get best of both worlds and get the full package out of them.
Got it. So how long did you work there and what were you working on? Was it decks and fashion and graphics and everything
I mean,
else?
it was everything, man. It was also, again, it was at a time like where I got the job a little bit on the premise that I know how to do computer graphics, which I really didn't yet, just kind of learning on the job. So it comes at a weird time transitionally because you're, one, trying to go into this professional field, but two, you're trying to learn the technology while you're doing it.
I
So
get
it
it.
was
I
just,
get it.
yeah. So it's kind of like, I don't know if it was a time of like the best work coming out of me, but it was a time of like, okay, I'm starting to learn something. And even, Jason was definitely, understood the computer graphics and design way more than I did. And, taught me a lot, but also I think became the beginning of collaborating with someone that we still kind of collaborate in that same way today.
Sure. And how much was I guess your particular, personal aesthetic jumping into that kind of work? Did it seep in somehow, or were you able to keep it very different
Yeah, at
or
that
separate
time, I
rather?
mean, not so much graffiti, but illustration was starting to develop into what I'm currently doing. I mean, it's like the style, like even a lot of my illustration, like I do a lot of line work and I paint with ink and brush. And I was doing that at that time as well, and just kind of kept evolving that as opposed to, using markers or other things. It was just paintbrush and black ink.
I get it. I get it. And so I want to show, just an example of one of your illustrations here so everybody understands sort of the work that you're, maybe doing for yourself when you illustrate. And then I want to also share some of your studio work with Morning Breath, as we sort of run down the clock to the hour, because I think that, you were influential in San Francisco and was able to contribute for a very long time. When you started to cross over and have your own design business, you've really had a lot of success. Uh, At least it seems so from afar. Morning Breath has, been in existence for a few decades, if I'm correct. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, since 2002. So we're going on 20 years now.
That is a major accomplishment for a business and for a studio.
Yeah, yeah, we're still trying to figure it out though.
That's
It's
that's
you
that's it sounds like you've figured a lot of it out.
and once I think I have, I realize I don't.
So just some photos that I grabbed online from, that show some of your studio work. I guess here some skateboard decks.
Yeah, some of that's just like, those are like little mini skateboard decks, but it shows a little bit of the kind of the play that we have of like kind of almost the way I like to think of us is like it's almost like it's like collage artists or it's like DJs mixing different sample tracks. It's some of it's found imagery, some of it's illustration mixed with found typography. It's just a little all over the place.
Your style in Morning Breath, although you guys seem to have a very wide range of style, there is a Morning Breath style.
Yeah,
I would
yeah.
say, if you could, define that, what is that style?
I mean, I think it's a balance between illustration and typography and graphic design elements. So a lot of it has kind of a throwback, almost retro quality to it. I think a lot of what we do, it's like paying attention to old printing methods and, you know, out of line registration on the artwork, a lot of halftones, just things that give it this feel that feels kind of retro, but also with the edge that is a little more fucked up so that it wasn't actually ever created during those early times.
Sure. And it seems like you also have a sense of humor that
Yeah,
goes through a lot of your work.
yeah, a little bit twisted, I guess, sometimes.
So, here are some more examples of the work of Morning Breath, and even more. And one of the things that I realize about the work that you've done, in particular with the skateboard industry or the skate industry, it's not easy to find. The stuff sells out, and so
Yeah, I think all that
you
stuff's
know
so limited too. It's small runs of things, and not just that, but there's so many others out there. I think things easily get lost and kind of lost in the mix of it all.
and here's some other things.
Yeah, again, it's like
Kind
the nostalgia, right? It's bringing back that look of those costumes that, we all kind of grew up with as kids. Or not all of us, but all of us of a certain age.
and there you see Slick Rick with all this
Yeah,
great typography work.
yeah. Jeanette Beckman photo.
Jeanette Beckman photo, and then just great mix of typography and illustration that you mentioned earlier. And so, what's 20 years running your own design studio? Uh, what can you share with us that you've learned, or what's the secret for success?
I think, man, you can't stop, and it's success. It's a weird thing to measure because life and work and everything is so up and down. I mean, we've definitely been very fortunate to kind of somehow, have this path where so much comes to us and keeps us for the most part busy, but there's never any promises. And I think we feel all the time like, how much longer is this going to last? When is the rug going to be pulled out from under us? And, we're kind of made the dedication to ourselves and our company that like we're going to ride it till the wheels fall off. But we constantly have to figure out ways to not so much reinvent because I don't want to say we're one trick ponies, but I think that we're like the older dogs that it's hard to show a new trick to sometimes and we're stuck in our ways. But how do we spread that out so that we can keep things going on?
It seems like you guys must have some very, very good reps because I've seen, so much work. You guys are, across music and fashion and skate and on and on. And, people are finding you. Is there, do you feel like you have earned a place in design where uh, you're, you're not chasing the work and the work is finally coming to you and you guys are sort of, respected enough that happens?
I think there's some of that. I mean, we don't chase it, I think, in part because we're not good at it. We don't know how to, but we've been fortunate that it comes our way. And like even that piece right there, Desert Sessions album, that we won a Grammy Award for that. And it's things like those. It's like those kind of accolades that we didn't expect and we didn't go after it. But when you get it, it helps things stay alive. Almost like it's like life and all of this is just this video game. And those are just those little like power ups that keep you going for a little bit longer.
It's quite an accomplishment to win a Grammy for design.
Yeah, no, right on. Thank you.
Of course, no, and congratulations for that, and for being able to be an entrepreneur and to be independent for 20 years. I think there's this dream that many artists have of doing that, and don't necessarily know how to achieve it or how they're going to get there. But I think for you and for Jason, you've succeeded thus far in, at the very least, being independent, doing your own art on your own terms. And then also, we were seeing before, coming back and painting whenever you want to.
Yeah, hopefully I could get out and do a little more, man. It's like every year goes by, I'm like, I want to do it. I just, man, your motivation gets distracted. Sometimes you end up just putting it in other spaces, but I'm sure that I will again. I'm sure that hopefully I get that bug that gets me out there more on a roll where it's a little more often.
Maybe some of the younger interns in the office that are bombing.
Yeah.
Well,
Even some of the older guys get out and do like what they do now, right?
yeah,
Pull out the barbecue grill.
it seems like it's more of an older generation thing sometimes than
Yeah, I
even a
mean,
younger generation thing.
there's some young people out there though, man, or younger than us at
It's
least,
true.
it's that are killing it.
Absolutely. And so, Doug, I wanted to thank you very much for joining me today and sort of taking us down memory lane with your work and sharing the stories and your personal journey with us. It means a lot that you did that for the Museum of Graffiti and for our audience. We have a lot of people tuned in today. And so we really appreciate your time and all the work that you do.
No, right on, man. And thank you for having me on here, man. I'm glad to kind of, be able to put that story out there, man, and kind of, you know, let people, I guess, a wider audience know. I mean, sometimes people get these little bits of stories when you're out having a drink with somebody, but and I'm sure I missed a lot, and there's a lot of people that I didn't mention and a lot of moments in time, but you know how that goes, man. An hour, it's like you could only throw out there what's on your mind. I don't have the script in front of me.
Yeah, no, it's quick, but we covered 40 years worth of art.
Yeah.
And so you've got deep roots, and we appreciate you very much and all your contributions and what you continue to contribute with your design work, which really changes products. It really makes things really great and cool and brings your own funk to the table. And so we love what you're doing. We love to continue to see it and to continue to celebrate you and your accomplishments. So thank you very much.
Right on.
And we hope to see you in person down here soon.
Yeah, you too. I need to get down there, man. I need to finally get down there and check the museum out.
It would be a pleasure for us to see you down here. And for everybody out there that's been with us for the past hour, thank you very much for joining us, for hearing the Museum of Graffiti's Art Talk series with DUG1 tonight. And thank you for everybody who donated tonight a badge. It helps keep us going. Tune in with us on Thursday. Doug, thank you so much.
All right, Alan. Take care.
Great night. Take care of yourself.